Hi, everyone. Can I, do you want to start or can I? Okay. Good afternoon. I hope you are all well. I'm Lorena Hakak, one of the co-founders of GeFam. Today, we have the last session of the second Brazilian meeting on family and gender economics with our keynote speaker, Shoshana Grossbard. On behalf of the entire group of researchers of GeFam, I would like to thank the partnership with the São Paulo School of Economics of Getúlio Vargas Foundation and our sponsors, Tendências Consultoria and XP Investimentos. I would like to invite you all to submit your papers to the special edition of the Brazilian Review of Econometrics in Family and Gender Economics. The call for papers is open until November 12th. More details can be found at GeFam website or at the journal website. Enjoying the session, I would like to hand over to Anna now.
Thank you, Lorena. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to our closing section. I will have the honor to introduce Dr. Shoshana Grossbard. But first of all, I have to read the disclaimer for this section. All statements expressed by Fundação Getúlio Vargas employees and guests in our online events and broadcasts exclusively represent their own opinion and not necessarily FGV's institutional position. We also reiterate that everyone present here agreed to participate in this event of their own free will, and they consent to be recorded in this broadcast, which will be posted on FGV's official channel. Well, now I'm going to introduce Shoshana. Thank you very much, Shoshana. You are welcome. It's an honor to me to introduce you as our keynote speaker for the closing section of the second Brazilian Family and Economics meeting. Shoshana has like a long curriculum vitae full of accomplishments. I will highlight some points because we want to hear her speaking. So she is a pioneer of the economic of marriage, contribute to the literature with the view of family as a firm where a spouse is hired to do the household work. She's the founder of the Review of the Household Journal and the Society of the Household Economics, the CEO. And in my personal experience, she is intelligent and passionate research with energy and promptness to work that I admire. Thank you very much, Shoshana, to be here with us. The floor is yours.
Thank you. I guess now I can share my screen. Okay, so my topic today is how does economics of the household help us cope with COVID-19? And I have to figure how to move the screen. Oh, here we go. I will address the question, how does economics of the household help us cope with COVID-19? First of all, as an editor, and then as an author. And there's three parts to this talk. First of all, I'm going to express gratitude. Second of all, I will talk about COVID and the review of economics of the household as an editor of the review. And third of all, I'll be talking about some of my own research related to COVID. So starting with gratitude, I want to first say obrigada to Lorena Hakak and Anna Fava and the other organizers for inviting me to participate as a keynote speaker in this meeting. Augusto do Brasil é português, but my Portuguese is not so good, so you can't really speak to me in Portuguese. But if you have trouble, there'll be time for questions. If you have trouble with speaking English, you can speak to me in French or Spanish, as long as you speak slowly. All right. I also want to thank my teachers in graduate school. I became an economist specializing in economics of the household, thanks to two major economists who founded the modern household economics, sometimes called new home economics. And namely, these are Gary Becker, who earned the Nobel Prize in 1992, and Jacob Mincer, and both have passed away. And they have made a major point that they made is that households are like firms, and you can apply price theory, which was developed to analyze firms. You can also apply it to households. I was a student in residence at the University of Chicago between 1972 and 1976. At that time, I took courses from Becker and Mincer, and I also took a labor economics sequence with H. Greg Lewis, who has also passed away a while ago. I was also influenced by Milton Friedman, who obtained the Nobel Prize in 1976. And one of his major points was prices are so important and models should be simple. Okay, so I have tried to apply the price mechanism wherever possible and in more ways than most other economists of the household. My dissertation was on the economics of polygamy. T.W. Schultz, right here, he introduced me to the topic. Actually, he found the topic for me, and he got the Nobel Prize in 1979. And all these guys obtained a Nobel Prize after I interacted with them as a student. Gary Becker agreed to chair my dissertation committee and got me a scholarship. And the other members of my committee at some point were Jim Heckman, who got the Nobel Prize in 2000, Ed Lazier, who recently passed away, and William Brock. Okay, I'm now switching to the topic, editing the review of economics of the household. First of all, some general information about the journal. The journal includes analysis, economic analysis of household production, human capital, health, nutrition, childcare, elder care, well-being of persons living in households, issues of gender and power, fertility and risky behavior, consumption, savings, wealth accumulation, labor supply, household formation, including cohabitation and marriage and fertility, dissolution of the household, migration, intergenerational transfers, experiments involving households, religiosity and civility. This is pretty comprehensive list. And what's in common for all these topics is they involve decisions within households. Now, here are some of the reasons why I founded the journal in 2001. There had been a steady stream of research on economics of the household. And it was often categorized as labor economics. In fact, some people still include all of household economics within labor economics. Now, why did that happen? It doesn't really make so much sense because many of the topics are very indirectly related to labor economics. But historically, the labor workshop at Columbia University was the home to the new household economics and also to the economics of human capital, which is a subfield of labor. And both of these fields were benefited a lot from the contributions of Gary Becker and Jacob Mincer. In 1969, Becker leaves Columbia for the University of Chicago. And there, in 1970, he starts a new workshop. And this time, he has learned from his experience at Columbia. He's not calling it the labor workshop. He's calling it applications of economics. And at that time, that was like a innovative name for a workshop. But now there's, tons of universities have applications of economics workshops. I participated in that workshop in the years 1974 to 1976. And meanwhile, after Becker left Columbia for Chicago, Jacob Mincer continued to run the labor workshop at Columbia. And anyways, it's still very common that people think that economics of the household is part of labor economics. Economics of the household, from the start when Becker and Mincer started to engage in this type of research, and they got students in the workshop where they were active to also write on these topics. There were many topics related to household economics. Here are some examples from the two workshops founded by Becker, because the Columbia workshop was also founded by Becker, and so was the Chicago workshop in applications. So here we have some example. Shirley Johnson got her PhD in 1967 at Columbia. She wrote a dissertation about the investment in marriage. Marjorie Honig, PhD, Columbia, 1971. She wrote on the impact of the welfare system on labor supply and family stability. Then at Chicago, I don't know if you've ever heard of Eddie Kogut, but he's Brazilian. And he got his PhD in 1972 at Chicago. And he wrote his dissertation on an economic analysis of a demographic phenomena, a case of Brazil. And it was about cohabitation, a non-marital cohabitation. I believe Gary Becker was his dissertation advisor. Then you have, in 1974, a PhD awarded to Michael Keeley at Chicago. Gary Becker is the chair of his dissertation, and he writes on the determinants of the optimal age at first marriage and differences in age at marriage. Then you have me. I got my degree in 78, which is 2 years after I left Chicago and started working part-time. Okay. Then, in addition to the Becker-founded workshops encouraging research on household economics, you have health economics is also introduced in one of these workshops, namely the one at Columbia. Michael Grossman is a student of Becker and Mincer, but mostly Becker, gets his PhD in 1970 and wrote his dissertation on the demand for health. which means that households are producing healthy behaviors such as exercise and nutrition. And this led to an article published in the JPE, which is very widely cited. And another example of applications of economics that were pursued by students at both workshops is Isaac Ehrlich, a student of Becker at Colombia, degree in 1970, writes his dissertation on illegitimate activities, which he analyzes like work. And at Chicago, just 5 years later, you have Walter van Dalen, who happens to be Belgian, like me. And I knew him, and I also knew most of these people. Okay, so his dissertation topic is the economics of crime on auto theft in the United States. Now, all this activity goes on in the 1960s and 70s. And now we are going to move on to 2000, 30 years later. What's happened? The economics of the household lost its momentum by 2000. There wasn't much research going on in this field. I think this might be part of the reason why Jacob Mincer wrote to me in 1993 to Shoshana with best wishes for continuing the tradition. Because what tradition is he talking about? This signed Jacob. This was a dédicace into a book that he had just published on all his publications in economics of labor supply, and most of them on women's labor supply. And I had continued to work on the subject of household economics. And so what tradition is he talking about? The tradition of household economics. This is in 93. I didn't do much as a result, but a few years later, I had the opportunity, with the help of Kluwer Publishers and an editor working for them named Zach Rolnick. He encourages me, Zach Rolnick, to write a proposal to start the review of economics of the household. And in the process of writing this proposal, I contact all the people I know who have been active in this field, including Jim Heckman, who had just won the Nobel Prize in 2000. So he had won in October 2000, and I contacted him about this maybe February 2001. So it was just a few months later. And he, at that time, felt very motivated to promote Jacob Mincer, who he thought should have also gotten the Nobel Prize. And anyways, he signed on to my proposal. Eventually, he changed his mind, and he has not been one of the people on the editorial board. But Becker and Mincer agreed to serve on the advisory board of this new journal. The other people who agreed to serve on this advisory board and have since passed away include Clive Granger, who also won the Nobel Prize at some point, Jack Hirschleifer, Ed Lazier, Jacob Mincer, as I said, and Finis Welch, who's been a very famous labor economist. So they all agreed to serve on the advisory board. And the major goal of this new journal, as I expressed it in the proposal, is to revive the tradition of the new home economics. Other members of this advisory board, Irma Edelman was also on this board, and she also passed away. So you still have Daniela Del Boca still on there, and so is Victor Fuchs, who's well into his 90s, Shelley Lundberg, Mark Nerlov, and Valerie Ramey are still serving on this advisory board. The first issue of the new journal appeared in 2003. Eventually, Kluwer got bought out by Springer, so now it's Springer publishing it. Okay, so also supportive from the beginning are former participants in Colombia's labor workshop. Michael Grossman, who agreed to be first an associate editor and then a co-editor for many years. He has since retired from this position. Barry Chiswick, who is the only student at Columbia during those years of the Columbia labor workshop, who published at least one article with both Becker and Minzer. And he has published 10 articles in Riho in the journal. The last one was published in 2020, March 2020, Divorce Among European and Mexican Immigrants in the United States, with Christina Hausworth. Another former participant in this workshop is Andrea H. Beller, first student of Jim Heckman. And Salomon Palachek, a prominent student of Jacob Minzer. They all supported this journal and serve until now on one of the boards. Furthermore, Pierre-André Chiappori, Robert Pollack, and Christopher Flynn have served on the editorial board and continue to serve on it from the beginning. Current editors who are actually coordinating reviews, if you submit a paper to the journal, you might, and you're not rejected without review. Unfortunately, we have to reject most paper without review because we only publish about 48 articles a year, and we get more than 500 submissions a year. So a very high percentage, more than 90% of all submissions are rejected. But if you don't get rejected, you might be in the hands of one of the following people. Jorge Agüero, University of Connecticut. He's originally from Peru. He's the first Latin American editor of the Review of Economics of the Household, but he lives in the United States. Hope Corman, who was a student of Michael Grossman, she's responsible for health economics. Enrica Croda in Venice, Italy, also health economics. Nacho Jimenez, University of Zaragoza in Spain, time allocation. Charles Horioka, Kobe University, Japan. He's responsible for consumption savings macro. Chiara Monfardini from Bologna, Italy. She does a lot of articles on children. Sonia Orifice, who's also originally Italian, University of Exeter in the UK now, and she does labor economics. Lucy Schmidt from Williams College in the United States, children and household formation. And Tanzel Yilmazer, Ohio State University. She's responsible for household finances, and she's originally from Turkey. All right. Now I'm going to be talking just a little bit of what this journal has done since the COVID crisis. Most topics that are covered by Riho are very connected to COVID because households are affected by COVID in so many different ways. So all these behaviors could possibly be analyzed in the context of COVID, and they belong, if they're good research, in this journal. And what we have actually published is, we've published in December 2020, we published articles by Dan Hammermesh, Daniela Del Boca, Jeff Harris from MIT, two people from University of California, Merced, on how people react to COVID-19, and also an article by Misty Lee Hegenes from the Bureau of Census on attachments to the labor market by parents, which is related to the research I'm going to be presenting in a later section of this presentation. March 2021, we published a number of articles that have to do with childcare and participation in the labor force, working from home, all about COVID, of course. Working from home, we have included an article about Japan and another one about the United States. Parental well-being in times of COVID in Germany, parental well-being and childcare and mental health in the UK, and an article on COVID-19 and domestic violence. And finally, in the June 2021 issue, we had articles on developing countries, but not really using data on COVID-19 because there was no data. And then there's my article with Ainhoa Aparicio, which I'm going to talk about in this next part of this presentation, and two articles about Mexico, consumption and geographic mobility, and COVID, and intra-household exposure to labor market risk and COVID. And then we have an article on consumption in Iran and COVID. And finally, an article on household time activities, food waste, and diet quality. Okay, so that ends my segment on the review of economics of the household and COVID. Let me only mention that we are not the only journal who has published about COVID. And among the other journals that published early on, because now it's a little different, COVID is not a new thing anymore. So many more articles on COVID are entering into the economic literature. But early on, there was some special issues of economics and human biology, Journal of Population Economics, and Feminist Economics. And this is, at this point, I'm ready to start talking about my own research that's related to COVID. But before I start that, so that I don't become too boring and I can stretch a little bit, I would like to ask for questions. If you have any questions about what I've presented so far, and the organizers should make sure to unmute you if you want to ask a question.
Shoshana, we'll wait a little bit to see if somebody write a question or raise their hands.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
For Shoshana, in your view, what are now in 2021? What are the key topics of research in family economics?
That's a very good question, Lorena. It's true that there's just so many topics that are related to households that the review cannot possibly publish in all these fields. So what has happened over the 20 years since the founding of the journal is that some topics are covered so well by other journals that we barely publish about them. For example, migration. I thought migration would be a great topic for the journal, but there's just many other outlets, apparently, relative to the amount of research. So we get few submissions on that, and then it's somewhat of a vicious circle, because if people don't see that their topic has been written about in the review, then they will send it to the journals that they are citing. So we don't get a lot of submissions about it, and we don't publish a lot about it. That's just one example, but there are many examples like that. And we mostly do micro applications, even though in principle there could be macro articles, but there's just not many of them. So to some degree, we respond to the supply of articles. Then to some degree, and there's other examples like education. There's a lot of education journals. And, until now, David Figlio was editor of the Journal of Human Resources. He himself is an education person. So people had that, the option of more options relatively in that field than, let's say, if the Journal of Human Resources has not published much over their history in recent decades about marriage or cohabitation. I mean, they do publish sometimes. So we publish relatively more about that, but not that much either. And I'm not sure exactly why. Then domestic violence is a new topic. So I like to give priority to new topics. And so the traditional journals in economics are not particularly likely to publish on that topic. They don't have a good record. We are relatively good at publishing on domestic violence, our record shows, and some of our articles have been cited widely, like an article by Trinidad Beleche, who wrote on Mexican data, and domestic violence has been cited quite a bit. So what else? I mean, it's hard for me to give you an exact list of all the topics that we publish about, but if you look at recent issues, even the ones that I mentioned here that included articles on COVID, these issues also included other articles. And so you can just see, what is being published. Let me just add that we have a feature that's called perspectives, okay? And what it's really, the idea here is that people can write a review article on a certain topic. It's a little bit like the Journal of Economic Perspectives that only publishes survey articles, and we only occasionally publish them. And then there is a title, Perspectives, but you might not see it online. So that's, most people don't get the printed version. So if you have any doubts about what was a perspective article, you can ask me, email me. And I would say the latest perspective article that we published, I think that one of the authors is Brazilian. His name is Manuel Santos, and he might even have participated in this conference, and it's co-authored with somebody who recently died who was a major household economist, and because I'm not a development, he was a major development economist, and because I'm not a development economist myself, his name, I always forget his name, but it just came out in one of the latest issues of REHO. And we are increasingly becoming a journal in economic development, because what qualifies an article as development economics is that it deals with data from a developing countries. And we encourage submissions with African data and data from all developing countries, which includes Brazil. So that doesn't guarantee publication, but it is something we encourage. I'll take one more question at this point, and then I'll continue the second part of the presentation. Any other questions?
May I? I heard you say that in 1993 that Mincer wrote to you about continue that household economics had lost the moment. How do you see the field of household economics now? And because I think we are gaining moment here in Brazil. When I arrive here, we don't have a lot of paper, and I kind of change to labor, to gender. But I feel now that we have a moment here, and we have aspiration to also open a association, a society of Brazilian household economics. So I would like to hear some of this story, and how do you think is today in the world and in the US?
Oh, excellent question, Anna. Thank you. So let me start by saying a few more words about Jacob Mincer, who I loved very dearly. He was a very nice person, and I had the privilege of organizing a conference in honor of his 80th birthday, which was in 2002 at Columbia University. And how did I get to organize that when I'm living in San Diego and kind of out of the loop, not in any major university? Well, Jim Heckman who had just obtained his Nobel Prize, felt bad that Jacob didn't get a prize. And so he wanted to have a big conference for Jacob. And for some strange reason, he asked me to organize it. So anyways, that's one thing about Jacob Mincer. But also, in the last, around that period when, or perhaps a little earlier, before the conference came up, I talked to him on the phone. I interviewed him because actually Anna is now involved in a project that also involves Andrea Beller. We're writing about the history of household economics. And at that time, I was working on my first paper on this topic, which appeared in Feminist Economics, and it was my own paper. And I interviewed Jacob on the phone. Somewhere in my room here, I have some notes that I took after we talked. And one of the things he said is that to him, the most important part of what should be studied in household economics is what has to do with children. He thought that's, and it's interesting. I think about this sometimes because Riho publishes a lot on children. Chiara Monfardini in the last few years has been responsible for all the submissions about children. Jim Heckman himself has done a lot of work on early education. And many of his students, some of them either Portuguese or Brazilian, I'm not sure, but they have Portuguese names, have been doing research on that. One of them has the last name Cunha, C-U-N-H-A. I'm not sure if he's Brazilian or Portuguese. Anyways, that's a topic that's very important. And now let me get back to the other part of your question, which is, what is my advice to Brazilians or any other country? So I think that household economics deserves more attention worldwide, and including in the United States. To be honest, you might not be aware of that, but maybe Ana Fava, after 1 year or many months in the United States, is now more aware of the pecking order of the universities here. Because when you live outside the United States, you don't realize that there is a huge gap between University of California, San Diego, and San Diego State University. Most people wouldn't know that. It might not be so common in other countries that you have this very huge gap. And there's an enormous amount of oligarchy and concentration of power in the United States in the academic environment, and the people of Cambridge, like Harvard and MIT, are controlling the profession in many, many ways, including through the NBR. But that's a whole lecture on its own. And because of this situation, whatever they do at Harvard and MIT, and maybe a few of other schools, is really the leading agenda. And they don't do household economics, barely. There's nobody of any reputation in household economics in those top universities. And this is increasingly also the case for Chicago. But, so Chicago was different, but it's no different anymore, in my opinion. All right, or very, except for Jim Heckman and all his children's stuff. But there's not much going on there in household economics. And the journals, the top journals, whatever they are, 5 journals always, they maintain this priority for other topics, throwing aside the economics of the household. And this has been a source of frustration for people like me who care about these topics. And most American economists, including women, don't fight for this. They accept it. They're not happy about it, but they're not doing anything about it. And in contrast, I'm the kind of person who doesn't just let these things happen. And I had the opportunity to do something about it, first of all, with the journal, and then with the organization. I think Brazilians who care about the household should also do something about it, and influencing your national organizations. The most prestigious schools shouldn't be discriminating against our topics. They are very legitimate topics, and they tend to be viewed with some condescendence on the part of people who have made it into the top departments and publish in the top journals. So there's that sense of oligarchy that prevails in the United States seems to have been exported all over the world, because all over the world, people aspire to publish in the top journals. And there's only those top American journals, with some European journals now making it very close. And at some point, Economic Journal, which is British, was in the 5, but then they were dropped. And I'm not sure that there's any of the European journals in the top 5 as they usually describe it. And there's like tons of articles about the top 5 this and the top 5 that. And I don't think any of them are European. So anyways, that's taking a long time to answer your question. Yes, you should do something about it. And now it's... can
I just say one thing? We have one question from the audience.
Okay.
We want to, yes, it's from Sarah Reynolds. She asks, how does household economics differentiate from sociology, where many of these topics are also studied?
Very good question. For a long time, I was very big on interdisciplinary cooperation, because I wrote my dissertation on polygamy in Africa and cited many articles from other disciplines, especially anthropology, but some sociology. And my first publication is in current anthropology. And so early in my career, I pursued the sociology and anthropology direction until I saw, at least in the United States, the way academia is constructed, you can't really build a career this way. And so I had to go back into more mainstream economics to get a good job and get promoted, etc. And so that's when I started working on labor supply, because I saw that just working on these esoteric topics did not help my career. So that's the short answer, because I really need to start talking about the other material that I prepared. And please let me get back into my PowerPoints. I don't know if if it's up to me. I guess it is up to me. Okay. Thank you. So now I'm going to be talking about my research related to COVID. And it went the wrong way. It just takes a little while to, okay, here we go. I will be talking about two projects, okay? And the first project is with Ainhoa Aparicio Fennell, who's originally from Catalonia. And we published 3 articles on the determinants of fatalities from COVID. And then the second project is with Cynthia Banzak and Crystal Hopo Wong. And this is about labor force participation of women, COVID, and laws about division of marital property. And Anna Fava, how much time do I have left? Because it's a little confusing for me with the time change.
Okay, so we are 12 to 6. So we have more 40 minutes.
40 minutes?
Yeah, it's 6:30 that finish.
6. Okay, but because I've asked for questions, so I have another at least half an hour, right? Yes. I have 30 minutes. All right. Okay, so my screen sometimes jumps. I have to be careful with that. Okay, so because I only have 30 minutes, I will talk very quickly about the first project on the determinants of death from COVID. Ainhoa and I used a data set composed of 50 US states and 35 European countries. For some of our articles, we only had 29 European countries. So the total number of observations is between 79 and 85. And the main questions we addressed were, first of all, is there intergenerational co-residence? Is that positively associated with COVID fatalities? By the time we started our project, there had been an article by Bayer and Kuhn who reported positive correlations when young people were more likely to live with their parents, young adults were more likely to live with their parents. They found that there were more deaths from COVID, and they used data from 24 countries. But then some other articles came out because they said, well, for example, our Pino and colleagues also in 220, they said, but this is not really true for Italy. Within Italy, those parts of Italy, those counties where they had more intergenerational co-residence of 3 generations or more, these counties had more people, fewer deaths than northern Italy, where you don't have so much intergenerational co-residence. So, and then there's been some other literature giving us a background. So we decided to check this out with data from 85 countries in Europe and states in the United States. And we measured number of deaths as cumulative death, either at 60 days after the onset of the pandemic or 100 days after the onset. And another topic we addressed was the US worse at preventing the spread of COVID than Europe? And I forgot to mention topic number 2, how beneficial is it that a country started its pandemic later rather than earlier? Okay, so let me tell you more about the data. What's the justification to include in one data set 35 countries from Europe and 50 states of the United States? One justification is that the size of these entities is often similar. there's only 7 European countries that have more inhabitants than California, namely Germany, Turkey, France, United Kingdom, Italy, Spain, and Poland. So size-wise, it makes sense to create this data set. Furthermore, in terms of political autonomy, US states have a lot of autonomy because the US has a federal system, and I understand that Brazil also has a federal system, but I don't know how comparable it is. And the European Union, even though they created the union, they still leave a lot of decisions to their individual countries, including decisions about what to do about COVID. So I'll skip this one. To facilitate the comparisons across the geographic units, we looked for data on the onset of the epidemic in each country or state, and there was some variation. 100 days after onset, this occurred, 100 days occurred on May 25 in France and July 22nd in Wyoming. So that's a 2 months range, and we control for that onset date. And there was a big variation in number of deaths at 100 days. This is per 100,000, I believe. In New York, you had 2,000, more than 2,000. And the lowest number was for Slovakia. This is New York State, and this is Slovakia, only 5 versus 2,000. So there was a huge variation. And then things changed when there were more waves of COVID, but not going to talk about that. Okay, so regarding the first question, is there a correlation, a positive correlation between intergenerational co-residence and death or fatalities from COVID? And if you put all our, in this case, 79 observations in one graph, simple correlations, you don't see any trend. But if you do it separately for Europe, the 29 countries in Europe and the 50 states for the United States, you do see a positive correlation for the United States, not for Europe. So that was very surprising to us. It turns out that there's quite a variation in intergenerational cohabitation between the various states in the United States. And in particular, the ones on the East Coast, like New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, they have much higher rates of co-residence between the generations than the mountain states or the West. Okay, but that's only correlations. Let's look at regressions. And so we ran regressions, and I'll go very quickly over these regressions. They include also information on the population over 65, the percent urban, domestic product, or state product, rental prices, and we also added number of days since the first death in France, the square value of that number, whether a government is left-leaning or not, a vector of social distance measures about what they did in each of these countries or states in terms of COVID measures. And the results are as follows. These are semi-logarithmic regressions of death after 100 days. So the variable can be translated into a percentage change. So if you only include whether the state or countries in the US or not, and the population size, and the number of deaths is a dependent variable, you see, of course, that population size, the more population, the more people died. But also in a US state, people died a lot more than in 30% more than in a European country as of 100 days. But that changes a lot once you add all these other variables, and one of them being co-residence. So what does this result mean? And that's going to be my focus here. The result means that if you add 1 extra percentage point in the share of co-residents for a country or state, this is associated with a 3.1 percentage increase in cumulative death. So it is a strong effect, and the effect is much stronger for the US, where that 1 extra percentage point in the share of co-residents is associated with an 11% increase in cumulative death from COVID in the US. In Europe, it doesn't really reach significance. Regarding question 2, how beneficial is it that a country's pandemic started later? We find that it's very beneficial. And that part of the research was published in Pathogens and Global Health, which is a medical journal. And by the way, the earlier one on co-residents, that was published in Economics and Human Biology in 2020. This was published in Pathogens and Global Health in 2021. And this is interesting to interpret this in light of the experience that Brazil experienced the epidemic quite late. And apparently, according to our research, the advantage of that is that a country was able, or a state were able to learn many medical techniques, both in terms of coping with the avoiding the medical techniques are mostly about how to address COVID once it hit a person. They just came up with a lot more methods that helped people avoiding death. The third issue of what exactly is the role of the United States, a lot of people were very mad at Trump at the time, and it actually helped Biden get into power. Perhaps that people were so upset with the performance of the president during COVID. However, it doesn't seem like the US really had a significantly higher rate of death once you control for all the social distance measures, which were mostly introduced at the state level in the United States. The federal government doesn't have that much to say about this. Okay, and next I'm going to start, conclusions. These are all the findings. In the conclusion, you're going to be getting these PowerPoints or my lecture. So it is now 6:00 Brazilian time, and I am now going to start. No time for questions. I will leave it till after my next part, which is my recent research with Cynthia Banzak from St. Lawrence University in New York State and Crystal Hopo Wong from National Tsinghua University in Taiwan. And the title of this research is Mothers' Employment, COVID, and Marital Property Regimes. We have so far published an IZA discussion paper about that in June, but we have more recent work. If you are interested, I can send you the most current version of this paper. And in this paper, we address the following question. When COVID struck, school closed and almost everywhere, and parents of school-age children were faced with new demands for at-home care. In response, women left the labor force considerably more than men. And this is true in the United States. And as far as I know, every other country that has had COVID, which is practically all over the world. So if you know of any exception where women did not leave the workforce more than men when schools closed, let me know. Next, I will present a conceptual framework very briefly because I only have a total of 20 minutes. and that explains why state rules for marital property division are related to how people responded to COVID. And I will also present an empirical study that tests for the predictions from the conceptual framework. So starting with the model, thank you for Anna for saying a few words about my model. At the essence of my model is the idea that some people are like workers in household production, and some people are like consumers. Now, that's not always the case. Many couples have both people doing the household production, sometimes equally. But it's also very common that one member of the household does more of the work in household production than the other. And so in that case, we're going to say there is a worker and a consumer within the household. The workers might be working only at household production and not participating in the labor force, or they may be working in the labor force as well, and then they are just part-time household production workers. On the consumer side, these are people, in the extreme case, they don't do any household production, or they do very little compared to what the worker does. And it's very often the case that the consumer will compensate the worker financially in the form of workers' access to their material and financial resources. Now, this way of conceiving it implies that individual suppliers will do their own optimization, and it's not a household optimization. It's not like they've, for example, in the collective model, you had the pleasure of listening to Pierre-André Chiappori yesterday. So he is one of the major presenters of the collective model. In the collective model, you first have a household being created, and then within that household, they decide how to, who's going to do what. But it's household optimization and individual optimization after the household has decided on a sharing rule, etc. Okay. In my model, there's at no stage is there household optimization. It's always individuals. The individual is there before the couple is created, after the couple is created. It's always during the time there is a couple. It's always individual in optimization. Now, I have an assumption that all the other models don't have, except early models of Becker that were applied to different things. And that, namely, that there is a price of time in household production. That price is set exogenously. And for the purpose of this presentation, let's say it's called Y. And both the supply of household production and the demand for it are going to be functions of this price. The supply of an individual supply will be upward sloping to the extent that the marginal utility of time in alternative time uses increases as the individual spends more and more time in one type of work. And you'll have a bunch of factors that shift the supply function. And one of them is the price of outside schooling. When they close the school's outside schooling becomes extremely high because there's very few options of where to send your kid to school. And other factors that will move this supply shift the supply include income and wage, all the regular variables that all models include. Okay. On the side of the individual demand for time, for whoever wants household production to be produced by a worker in his or her household, how much time do they want this other individual to come and work for them, raise their kids, cook for them, do their laundry, whatever is included in household production. This will be an inverse function of the price. The more expensive it is to get somebody like that, the less you will get it. Again, the individual demand is going to shift with income, wage, prices, including the price of schooling. So this is a graphic representation. I'm not going to dwell on it. It looks like every demand and supply. You have it at the individual level, at the market level, you aggregate all the individuals. They participate in the same markets. These are hedonic markets because there's many markets for different types of people. At the second stage, the market, you get all the individuals together and the price is established. How we don't have good measurements of these prices, that's a problem. But for most purposes of all the analysis I've done in the past, you don't need to have the price. You can just assume there is a price and that people know there is a price. Okay, next. That's something I'm skipping too. Okay, now we're going to be looking at the laws dealing with the division of marital assets that offer protection to workers in household production. These laws matter in case the marriage is dissolved. There is a dissolution of the marriage, either because of death or because of divorce. And it's a little bit like the role of a pension benefit in the case of a labor supply. The labor supply varies with the wage, but if there is pension benefits, better pension benefits, this is going to cause a shift in supply. And okay, so this is the same idea. The more the workers in household production get protection, in case of marital dissolution, the more their home workers will be willing to work in household production at any given price. And therefore, the individual supply shifts to the right if there are better benefits related to the laws. Okay, now what happens when COVID starts? COVID causes a big shift in the supply of household production by the workers because they have to take care of these kids. The kids are home. The schools are closed, so they have to respond. But the consumers are also going to respond because they figure, well, these are my kids. They can't be in the street. They have to find a solution. And maybe if they are in a traditional household, the man will be the consumer and the men are going to beg their wife, please, you have to take care of the kids. What am I going to do? I can't leave my job. That's some of what might go on. Okay, now both shifts, and so clearly there'll be more home production, and that often implies people leaving the labor force to take care of the kids. Okay, now there's a possibility that the shift in supply happens before the shift in demand, or that the shift in supply has a more immediate response than the shift in demand, because the shift in demand involves convincing the worker that the worker needs to work more, giving the worker incentives, and that might not happen right away. Okay, now we're going to translate this model into a testable model by assuming that the household production workers are women. And as in this picture, which was taken in Italy, and one of the first articles to show that women were the ones who were principally reducing their labor supply when COVID hits. That is an article with Italian data by Daniela Del Bocca and Paola Profeta and two other authors, which was published in Rio and has been very widely cited. Okay, but it could have been in Brazil or in I don't know about the exact data in Brazil, but certainly in the United States, we see a much bigger response by women than by men. So the first prediction is going to be that in states with better protection, for homemakers, the people who make the household production, in case of marital dissolution, women will respond more to school closures after the onset of COVID. So we expect that the states that offer more protection for women, because women will say, well, no, I can't quit my job. I'm busy. This is my future. If I quit, I have no pension. But if you live in a community property state in the US, and Brazil is a community property country, there's no variation within Brazil, as far as I know. But in the US, most states don't have community property. But if you have community property, you're not so worried about it because I own half of the property. So I'm not going to be on the streets. I know I own half of what this couple owns. In states without community property in the United States, you have most of them, 37 of them, have something called a homemaking provision, which provides better protection to homemakers than what is available in the other equitable division states. And here, there's a reference to a previous article by one of our group, one author, Hopo Wong. She has published in Journal of Demographic Economics about these homemaking provision and divorce. Okay. Now, in the long run, this might not be the case that the states with better protection of homemakers are actually having more women stay at home, because in the long run, just like in labor markets, the price of homemaking changes, and the consumers can, in this case, can express their preferences just as well as the workers. And so what we don't expect there to be a long run effect of the state having community property or homemaking provisions. Prediction 3, the labor supply effect of property division regimes depends on how prevalent is home ownership in this state. The more prevalent it is, the more community property is likely to have an effect, and also the more homemaking provisions will have an effect. Finally, what matters is whether the observation, individual observation, is born in the US or an immigrant. Because if you're an immigrant to the US, you may not pay so much attention to the laws of community property and homemaking provisions. You may actually not be aware of these laws. Okay, methods, we use a difference in difference approach, and we use an event study model as well. And I'm running out of time. It's already 6:14. So all I have time for is to tell you that we use the current population survey, the microdata. Our sample are mothers of children ages 5 to 12 who are going to kindergarten and elementary school up to grade 6. The age range is 25 to 64. The period is January 2019, well before COVID, until December of 2020. So we are not capturing all the parts of 2021. And we use 50 states plus the District of Columbia. And most states in the United States started their pandemic in March 2020. Okay. By the way, all the states that have community property were originally colonized by Spain or France. And that just shows you how old these laws are. They're totally unrelated to COVID. Home ownership rate, we also control for sex ratios at the state level. And we have a number of other state level variables. Because we have so many state level variables, we can't control for state fixed effects. Findings. First of all, just look at this chart. In blue, the dotted line is 2019 for every month of 2019. And you see a certain level of non-participation of women in this age group with children ages 5 to 12. And you see that actually there was a decrease in non-participation starting in August because the economy had picked up and there were a lot more jobs available. Unemployment had gone down, on the last months of 2019. And then in orange is 2020. And so the first months of 2020, you have low unemployment, low levels of non-participation. And then you get March 2020, and there's a big increase in non-participation of mothers of school-age children. And then it kind of goes down a little bit, but it remains higher than what was going on in 2019 throughout this whole period. Now, these are the results of the analysis with difference in difference. And in yellow, you see that combination of homemaking provision and pandemic has a positive effect on non-participation due to giving care. The question actually asked, were you not in the labor force because you were giving care? And that's the answer, okay? Same thing with community property and the pandemic. In contrast, I can't move that thing. In contrast, if you only have pandemic, you don't see an effect. And if you look at community property alone, no effect. Homemaking provision alone, no effect. Okay, and so that confirms the first prediction, the main prediction, and also the second prediction. Now, with event analysis, we did an event analysis, and I'm asking you to focus on panels B and C. In panel B, this is for the states with community property. And you see that after the onset of COVID, there is a big increase, there is a significant increase in non-participation for the states with community property. And panel B at the bottom left also has a similar pattern, and those are the states that have a homemaking provision. Panel D at the bottom right doesn't have this pattern. You see that after the onset of COVID, there was no increase in the labor force participation of women who are mothers of children between ages of 5 and 12. And prior to the start of COVID, the pattern for all four panels, the first panel being all of the states, is similar. So this is, I think, very convincing evidence that these laws matter. Summary of findings. The effect is that in community states, a woman's probability of non-participation increased by about 3.5 percentage points. In the equitable division property states with homemaking provision, it's about 2.5 percentage point. And this is compared to the states with equitable division and no homemaking provision. Okay, I had more stuff that I wanted to talk about, but it's now 6:20 and we are running out of time. So I will stop here. However, there is a pitch at the very end for my book. My latest book is The Marriage Motive, A Price Theory of Marriage, published in 2015. If you're interested in my model, you should read it. There's some empirical studies also, mostly on labor supply, but also some articles on consumption, but with little empirical work. So I'll stop here and take questions.
Thank you very much. Do we have any questions here? I have a question, if I may.
Okay.
For the first paper, when you talk about like how US had more positive relationship, it surprised me because I would think that US would be less intergenerational co-residence. But I wonder if you had a chance to check if this was something that occurred more among Latinos and African Americans. And they also are the ones who have a high rate of infection, right?
Very good question. So first of all, our data set being aggregate data set was only between 79 and 85 observations. We can't really address that very well in that particular study. But I looked at the rates of, I was very surprised myself, and so was my co-author. And most people I've shown this to were surprised that that in the United States, there was more of such an effect than in Europe. When I looked at the actual data for each state, it turns out that the highest rates of co-residential, intergenerational co-residence were on the East Coast, New York, New Jersey, Rhode Island, Connecticut. These are the states where you have very high rates, more than double the rate of intergenerational co-residence than you have in South and North Dakota, which have the lowest rates. And so this doesn't have much to do with Latinos or, there are more Latinos on the East Coast than in South and North Dakota. That's true. There's also more African Americans there. But, I doubt that that's the main explanation. In fact, it might have something to do with ethnicity of the immigrants having been maintained over generations in the East Coast. For example, Italian Americans continue to live in the same neighborhood, and they still have very strong family values compared to immigrants from Germany or most of the Midwest was settled by Europeans of Germanic descent. And so that has perhaps more to do with it. I think it's certainly a subject worthy of further investigation. Anna, the other Anna.
Yes, here in Brazil, we have a domestic worker, and we have a lot of heterogeneity among women, and they help the more educated women taking care of the household and the child. And with COVID, the more educated women that go outside for the market work had to stay at home. And this correlation or this causality that you found out in the second paper about the equity division and the non-participation, I do not think that here in Brazil and in developing countries that without the domestic worker, I think that me and Lorena, we want to find exactly this. I think that women stayed at home just and no participate in the labor markets to take care about the children, even with this law that we have this equity division, I think that the main reason is that to stay and it's a kind of a bad distribution among women, a heterogeneity perverse, because they helped the more educated women, and now, and with the COVID, they are with no employment, and they are how is like the public policy can help them, you know, like it's really bad. Yes. How the economic family, like, and there's another topic about gender division among the
educated and
the more educated couple. Now they face the gender labor division, and the divorce increased, you know, because with domestic work, like, so there's a lot of issues that COVID-19 brought. So
you're perfectly right. You're so right. That's a very important topics, a number of topics that you are raising. And first of all, this particular study is about school-age children. So in the United States, you also have a lot of people who employ nannies. They call it nannies, or, you know, domestic help. In San Diego, when I raised my children, they're now, you know, in their 30s, but I used domestic help from Mexico. You know, it was relatively very cheap because we are near the border with Mexico. However, nowadays, this is not the case because they closed the border, and, you know, it's much harder to get domestic help in San Diego, but that's another issue. So we are looking here at school-age children. So chances are that the parents, if parents only have school-age children and they don't have little children, they may already have gotten rid of the nanny. If they had a nanny, in the United States, at least, you typically, once the kids go to school, you don't have a nanny anymore. Nannies are very expensive. In Brazil, of course, they're not so expensive. So the parents of school-age children might also have had nannies. But the problem, as you described, affected educated couples at least as much as the poor families who already were struggling before COVID, but the COVID families, all of a sudden, the kids are not going to school. They have to find an alternative. And so that created, in the United States and Italy and many other countries that have been investigating this topic, they found a big increase in women's non-participation, staying home to care for school-age children. Now, what I didn't have time to show you is that we have a robustness test, and we did the same regressions to samples of mothers of children who are older, above age 12. And we also had it for childless women, and we had it for men who have school-age children. And none of these groups responded the way that the women, mothers of school-age children, responded. So it seems like these laws of community property and homemaking provision specifically affected the labor force participation of women who have school-age children and had to cope with a sudden need to take care of children when they had found other solutions before. And my prediction is that you will find the same thing in Brazil for the in terms of a drop of non-participation of mothers of school-age children. But you can't really look at the equivalent of our legal variable in Brazil because there's no variation across the states. They all have community property throughout Brazil. So this part you can't copy, but maybe there are other aspects of this research that can be implemented with Brazilian data.
We have some descriptive analysis.
What?
we have descriptive analysis.
Okay.
About what happened, and single mothers, they had a higher decrease in the participation in the labor force than other women. I think we should call not she session, but mom session.
Right, it's true. It's true. And in fact, another part of our paper compares the effect of the Great Recession that happened in the United States in 2007 to 2008. And we did a similar analysis comparing before and after the recession. And we found opposite results. We don't find anything like that in terms of these laws of protecting homemakers.
I don't think we have questions from the audience.
And I think we also ran out of time, no? Although I can speak a few more minutes if you have more questions. I'm not in a rush.
Well, I would like to say thank you very much. It was very good talk and very enlightening. And well, I think we will leave this meeting very inspired by you and all the people who presented. We have like great work being presented here. We have lots of good speakers that come here. It was 2 wonderful days. And I would like to thank you also the people who organized this meeting, that they are here, Lorena, Ana, Cynthia, Solange, and all the people who are helping, and the people who are supporting behind too, and the people who presented. It was 2 great days, and I'm so sad that finished, but we will have as we recorded, we will have this available soon, right, Lorena?
Yes. Can I use the session to close the conference?
Yes. Oh.
Sure.
Yes, but you finished before.
Do you want to say something else, Shoshana?
No, I'm finished. Thank you very much.
I think we are going to invite people to have a picture, and we would like to stay to have a picture with us too.
Yes, we'd like to invite everybody that is as a attendee to come as a panelist.
Yeah, I'd like to see who are the 28 people participating.
Yes. Use FGV to open.
Even if you don't have pictures of everybody, I'd like to see them.
They have to raise hands, and then we can open. Please raise your hands.
Oh, there.
My husband is here.
Yeah, I recognize many of the names.
Yes.
Hello, everybody.
Hello.
Hi.
And so somebody's going to take a picture of the screen.
Yes, that's the idea. Still have more people to come. I think we don't have More people are raising their hands.
All right.
Anybody else? Gianna?
Gianna raised her hand.
Yes. Don't be shy, people. Raise your hands. Okay. I'll take a picture. Okay. I think we are done. Nobody else. Okay. I would like to thank, on behalf of the entire group of GeFam, of researchers of GeFam, I would like to thank also to our incredible two keynote speakers, Shoshana Grossbard and Pierre-André Chiapori, to participate in our meeting. Also, all the panelists and the attendees. I would like also to thank our partnership with FGV, Getúlio Vargas Foundation. They embrace GeFam since the beginning. Last year, they also, we had the same partnership. And I think they embrace the idea that how important it is to study family and gender economics. Also, our sponsors, Tendências Consultoria and XP Investimentos. And we wait to see you all again next year in our third meeting. And don't forget that we have webinars every 2 weeks. And the next webinar will be on September 17th. Some of them are in Portuguese and some of them are in English, but don't miss it. And the sessions in this meeting, they were all recorded, and we will post them at FGV YouTube and also GeFam YouTube, so you can see what you missed or what you liked most. Thank you very much. Bye-bye. Thank you, guys.
Bye.
Thank you all.
Bye-bye.